He overheard her whisper, "My husband hurts me," and that changed everything. The morning was quiet, broken only by the slow creak of the church's weathered sign swinging in the breeze. Dust floated in beams of sunlight that pushed through the clouds above Stillwater, a town where silence wasn't golden, it was enforced. Behind the church, where the grass had long since turned to dust and the wooden fence leaned tiredly to one side, she stood alone. Miriam, slender, with her brown hair tied in a low knot and her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron as if holding herself together. She thought no one was there, but under the shade of a twisted mesquite tree, half hidden from view, sat a man sharpening a broken horseshoe. He had arrived just 2 days earlier, quiet as a shadow, and no one knew his name. People called him Stranger, and he didn't argue. He didn't mean to listen. When she leaned her head back against the fence post and whispered, "My husband hurts me," the words reached him like a gust of wind cutting through heat, soft, raw, final. He froze. Miriam didn't speak again. She only turned slowly, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, and walked back toward the parsonage. Her movements were graceful, but her limp betrayed an old injury, one the townsfolk pretended not to see. The man didn't follow. Not yet. Inside the church, the pews waited silently for the Sunday congregation, and from the front steps, Pastor Reuben watched her return with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, the stranger lay on the floor of the blacksmith's barn, arms crossed behind his head, staring at the rafters. The words echoed again. "My husband hurts me." He had seen plenty of pain in his time, but there was something about the way she said it, like she had given up asking for help. In a town like Stillwater, no one helped unless it benefited them. He'd learned that the hard way years ago, but maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And that difference had already begun, with a whisper no one else had heard. The next morning the town moved with its usual rhythm, slow, sun-scorched and watchful. Stillwater was a place of glances, not words, and as the stranger stepped into the street with his hat low and boots grey with dust, he felt those glances trail him like whispers behind closed doors. He passed the general store where the owner nodded but didn't speak. The barber peeked once through the window but stayed seated. People didn't like outsiders, especially not ones who noticed things. Stopping at the well, he filled his tin cup. From there he saw the parsonage, an ordinary house behind a perfect white fence, and roses that never wilted, even in drought. Miriam emerged with a basket of laundry, eyes downcast, walking stiffly. On the porch, Pastor Reuben polished his boots, pretending not to watch her. Pretending. The stranger turned away, but not before Miriam's eyes met his, just a heartbeat long enough to say, "I remember what you heard." Later, at the smithy, he asked the blacksmith about the pastor. The old man chuckled without humor. "Reuben, folks love him, preaches hard, prays louder, thinks he's God's right hand. And if you ask me," the smith whispered, "the devil's hand looks a lot like God's sometimes." By sundown, the stranger had walked past the church 3 times without meaning to, hoping to glimpse her again. He didn't know why, maybe because no one else was looking. That night, Miriam folded bruised hands over her Bible while Reuben thundered through his sermon rehearsal. She whispered, barely sound, barely hope, just enough to survive. Before dawn, the stranger left the barn and followed the empty well road. Mist clung to the dry riverbed like ghosts of water long gone. Ahead, a slender figure staggered with a sack of laundry. Miriam. She didn't see him until a coyote's cry startled her, and the sack slipped. He caught it. Their hands touched. Bruises marred her arm. "Road's rough," he said. "Let me carry it." "He'll be angry," she breathed. "No one's watching." They walked in silence. When she asked why he cared, he answered, "Because you whispered." At the wash house, the other women fell quiet, eyes flicking from her bruises to his scarred face. Hope flickered and vanished. Stillwater punished anyone who stared too long at the truth. Dust rose as Pastor Reuben galloped in. Seeing the stranger beside his wife, he dismounted and gripped her wrist exactly where the bruises lay. "Let her go," the stranger said. "Who are you to order me?" Reuben sneered. "A man who sees you hurting her." The gathered women held their breath. Assessing the witnesses, Reuben released her and forced a laugh. "This drifter'll learn his place." He spurred away, but the stranger had already seen fear in those sermon black eyes. Miriam's shoulders sagged. "You shouldn't have interfered." "I had to." She whispered something, thanks, or a prayer, then turned back to her wash. He left knowing two things. Reuben feared exposure more than bullets, and Miriam would pay double for every kindness. He took the long route to the smithy, replaying the scene. Halfway up Main, a notice declared, "Church picnic, donations, welcome." He wondered how many coats a preacher needed in a land where winter barely came. The sheriff's office dozed behind sun-warped shutters, badge tarnished. Justice here slept at noon and woke only for bribes. At the forge, he hammered iron until sparks rose like fireflies, each blow a vow. As dusk settled, he climbed the ridge above town. A lamp glimmered in the parsonage window. Miriam, perhaps praying, perhaps simply breathing. He raised a hand she would never see, a brittle promise. Below, the riverbed shimmered silver in moonlight, an empty vein aching for rain. He felt the same thirst, to replace a whisper of pain with a laugh of freedom. The church bell tolled in the distance, an iron throat clearing for Sunday judgment. Whatever came, Reuben was no longer alone with his sins. Sunday dawned fierce and bright, as though the sun itself wanted to bleach Stillwater clean. By 8 o'clock, every bell in town was ringing, but the clamor inside the church was louder. Hundreds of voices praying, gossiping, humming hymns that sounded like lullabies for secrets. The stranger arrived late and chose the very back pew. From there he could study the flock and the shepherd. Reuben ascended the pulpit in a spotless black coat, Bible raised like a judge's gavel. Miriam sat in the front row, her hair swept high to hide the bruise on her neck, spine rigid as a fence post. Reuben thundered about submission, about sin that lurked in rebellious hearts. Each time he said, "Husband," his gaze caressed Miriam like the lash of a whip. The congregation nodded, blind and devout. The stranger felt the pew creak under his grip. Mid-sermon, a small boy slipped from his mother's lap and toddled down the aisle. He reached Miriam, touched her skirts, and smiled. She managed a tiny smile back. Reuben's fist cracked the lectern. His sermon swelled with talk of discipline. The boy's mother hurried forward, cheeks aflame. Miriam shrank. When the service ended, Reuben greeted parishioners at the door, blessing them by name. The stranger lingered near the stairs to the gallery, waiting for the last goodbye. "Stranger," Reuben called, surprising him. "Care to break bread at our table?" The invitation was a trap. The grin said so. But refusing would raise questions. He tipped his hat. "Obliged, Pastor." At noon he walked to the parsonage beside husband and wife. Miriam kept her eyes down. Inside, the dining room gleamed with polished silver. Reuben filled the stranger's cup himself. "To fellowship," the pastor said. They ate roast chicken seasoned with guilt. Between bites, Reuben asked where the stranger had ridden before Stillwater. The stranger offered half-truths. Arizona mines, New Mexico plains, nowhere worth a sermon. Reuben's smile thinned. Dessert arrived. Peach pie Miriam had baked. Her hands trembled serving it. When Reuben bowed to pray, the stranger saw bruises shaped like fingertips along her wrist. After the blessing, Reuben excused himself to study. Books slammed in the next room. Miriam began clearing plates. The stranger rose to help, but she shook her head. "He's listening," she mouthed. China rattled. Footsteps neared. Reuben returned, carrying a decanter of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured only for himself and the stranger. "Toast with me," he said. "Two honest men." Miriam stood silent by the doorframe, invisible as wallpaper. Reuben's eyes gleamed. The stranger lifted the whiskey but did not drink. Reuben knocked his own back. "You'll leave tomorrow," he said softly. "Work's done at the smithy. Storm's coming." The stranger met his gaze. "Storms don't scare me." Reuben leaned closer, whiskey sour on his breath. "They drown drifters. They wash away whispers." The air between them smelled of peaches and threat. The stranger set his untouched glass down. Miriam's breath hitched. A single clap of thunder cracked outside. Dry thunder. No clouds in sight. The stranger tipped his hat to Miriam and walked out, boots echoing on polished boards. Reuben's voice followed, velvet and venom. God loves a man who knows his place. Outside, the church bells were silent now, but in their hush the stranger heard something louder. The promise of a storm that would not wash him away, but wash Stillwater clean. The sky stayed clear, but through the night thunder rolled like a wagon on broken wheels. Under that hollow rumble, Stillwater held its breath. Lamps went out early, doors bolted, yet no one slept well. Reuben's warning travelled faster than gossip. The drifter would leave at dawn, or else. The stranger did not pack. Instead, he sat on an overturned bucket behind the smithy, sharpening a length of scrap steel into something vaguely like a blade. Sparks licked the dark, tiny fireflies of resolve. Each spark repeated the pastor's words in his head. They wash away whispers. Close to midnight, footsteps crunched. The blacksmith, lantern in hand, appeared from the gloom. "Trouble's coming, son." "Already here," the stranger answered. The old man set the lantern down. "You plan on fixing it alone?" Silence. "Thought so. Got something you should see." He handed over a small leather book. "Ledger. Reuben buys laudanum and ether from the doctor every month. Far more than folks think. He signs under church expenses." The stranger thumbed the brittle pages. Dates, doses, initials. Proof that sermons weren't the only thing Reuben used to keep Miriam quiet. He closed the book, feeling the weight of it like a bullet. "We could show the sheriff," the blacksmith offered. "The sheriff's afraid of God," the stranger said, tucking the ledger inside his coat, "or of the man who claims to speak for him." Morning crept in without dawn's usual colors, the sky a bruised gray. At the well, townspeople gathered, women filling buckets, men rolling cigarettes, all pretending not to notice the drifter who was supposed to be gone. Reuben stood on the church steps, Bible under one arm, chin lifted. Miriam hovered behind him, veiled hat hiding her face. The stranger walked up the dusty center of the street, every boot step a small act of rebellion. When he stopped before the pastor, the town fell silent enough to hear the well rope creak. "I'm not leaving," he said. Reuben's smile was a knife. "You have no right to stay." "I have a right to hear her speak without fear." He looked past the pastor to Miriam. "Ask her if she wants me gone." Reuben began to answer, but Miriam touched his sleeve. It was a feather-light motion, yet it stopped him like iron. She stepped forward, veil trembling. "Let him stay," she said, voice clear enough for every porch and window. Gasps rippled. Somewhere a dog barked, confused by the tension in the air. Reuben's face reddened. Veins stood out on his neck. "You defy your husband publicly?" "I obey God," she replied. "He hears whispers too." The pastor raised his hand. Whether to strike or bless, no one knew. The stranger moved first, placing the ledger in that lifted hand. "Records," he said. "Doses you never preached about." Reuben's fingers clamped the book. For a second his power flickered. He thrust it into his coat and barked, "Church at noon. We'll settle blasphemy then." He stalked inside, slamming the doors. The bell clanged once, a command rather than a call. The crowd scattered, murmuring. The stranger remained by the steps. Miriam's veil slipped, revealing a faint bruise on her cheek and a spark of something fierce in her eyes. Thunder rolled again, still without rain. Yet everyone felt the storm had finally reached town. Stillwater's bell tolled 12 times, each clang a nail driven into the town's own coffin. Heat shimmered above the dirt street. Even the flies had retreated to shade. Yet every resident stood outside the church, drawn by a promise of judgment or spectacle. The stranger arrived first, coat stripped down to a linen shirt darkened with sweat. His eyes never left the church doors. In his pocket lay the blacksmith's ledger and a slip of paper Miriam had pressed into his hand at dawn. He keeps another book in the cellar. Proof, she wrote, of everything. Miriam stepped from the parsonage, veil abandoned. A yellowing bruise crossed her cheekbone like a fading sunset. She walked alone, head up, Bible clutched to her ribs. The sight sliced through the crowd's murmurs. Women looked away. Men tipped hats without meeting her gaze. Reuben flung the double doors wide. He wore his vestments, black frock coat, white collar, silver cross that caught the sun and flared like lightning. "Enter!" he called, voice syrup thick. "The Lord welcomes the curious." Inside, pews overflowed. The stranger remained standing at the aisle's end, leaning on a support beam. Reuben launched into prayer, words booming from rafters. Mid-invocation, he opened the ledger and waved it, as if blessing the flock. "This stranger accuses me with half-truths," he proclaimed, "but our Lord sees the whole heart." Miriam rose, gasps rippled. "The Lord sees bruises too," she said. Reuben's hand tightened on the ledger. "Silence, wife." She took a shaky breath. "You told me silence was obedience. I believed you until the day my whisper found ears braver than yours." Reuben pounded the pulpit. "Blasphemy! I have cared for you." "With laudanum and ether," the stranger interrupted, voice low but carrying. He held aloft the ledger. "Church funds for poison." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably 3 pews back. The town doctor stared at his boots. Reuben's eyes darted, beast cornered. "Those medicines treat her nerves." Miriam unbuttoned her sleeve, revealing pinpricks on pale skin. "Nerves you shattered." The stranger stepped forward. "Show them the cellar book." Reuben's face drained. "You broke into my home." "No," Miriam said. "I wrote down where you hid it. God forgives truth-tellers." Whispers swelled like wind before a storm. 2 deacons stood, uncertain which master to serve. Reuben seized a candle holder, brandishing it. "Back, all of you!" The stranger didn't draw steel. He simply moved between pastor and pews, a wall of calm. "You preach storms," he said, "but storms can cleanse." Behind him, Miriam reached the pulpit. She opened her Bible, pages hollowed to hide a slim ledger bound in red cloth. The congregation saw pages filled with Reuben's tidy script, dates, punishments, dosages, marital debts. The sheriff finally pushed forward. "Pastor, you'll come with me." Reuben's roar shook dust from rafters. He lunged at Miriam, candle holder swinging. The stranger caught his wrist mid-arc. Metal rang on wood. In the stillness that followed, Reuben sagged, knees buckling, faith unraveling like thread. Miriam spoke once more, voice steady. Whispers become thunder when someone listens. Outside, thunder rumbled, the first hint of real rain in months. The first drop struck the church bell and rang it all by itself. A slow hush rippled through the street as faces tilted upward. Clouds, black as gunmetal, had marched in, while everyone argued inside wooden walls, and now they emptied with the fury of a dam burst. Dust turned to mud in seconds. Horses shied, and canvas awnings sagged under sudden weight. Inside the jail, the sheriff slammed the cell door on Pastor Reuben, whose vestments clung to him like wilted petals. 2 deputies wrestled shackles onto his wrists. Outside, the stranger stood beneath the eaves, rain carving silver stripes down his hair. Miriam was beside him, hat forgotten, bruises rinsed until they looked like pale lavender blossoms. "Storm's yours," she said softly. "No," he answered, voice almost drowned by thunder. "It belongs to the town." Across the way, Deacon Harp rallied a knot of loyal parishioners. They clustered beneath umbrellas, faces lit by fanatic resolve. "He's the Lord's anointed," Harp cried. "We won't let a vagrant and a hysterical woman ruin our shepherd." The stranger stepped into the open, and the rain, mud splashing up his trousers. "The shepherd beat his lamb," he said. "Let the water tell the truth." Harp advanced, brandishing a soggy Bible, but lightning split the sky, cracking so close the air tasted of metal. Instinctively the crowd fell back. In that white glare they saw Reuben at the barred window, eyes wild, mouth shaping silent curses. The jail roof leaked. The sheriff dragged a bucket through puddles on the floor. He muttered, "Never seen rain like this." Water sheeted off the eaves, hammering the boards with relentless fists. Then came a worse sound, a roar from the riverbed, the empty channel that cut behind town. Months of dust could not swallow so much water so fast. "Flood!" the blacksmith warned, limping toward them. "If the bridge goes, the cattle pens'll drown." Without command, the stranger grabbed rope, lanterns, and men willing to help. Miriam joined, gathering blankets from women who once gossiped about her limp. Soon, a chain of townsfolk stumbled toward the swelling torrent. Where the wooden bridge had stood, only twisted planks rode a brown wall of water. A young boy, a choir singer, was trapped on the far bank, clinging to a cottonwood. The stranger tied rope around his waist. "Hold fast," he told Miriam. She knotted the other end to a stump. He plunged into the flood, muscles shrieking against the current. Twice the rope jerked, nearly snapping. But he reached the tree, lifted the shivering child onto his back, and fought homeward until hands hauled them both onto solid ground. Cheers rose, mixing with rain. Tears mixed with mud. Some who cheered had jeered him the day before. In the downpour, prejudices washed away like chalk off a slate. Back in town, Reuben watched from his cell, hatred boiling hotter for every hurrah. He whispered scripture that spoke of purging fire, but heard only the hiss of rain. Water seeped under the iron door, soaking his fine boots. That night, candles flickered in the blacksmith's loft, where Miriam wrapped blankets around the rescued boy. Children crowded to hear her read calming psalms. The stranger sat apart, sharpening the scrap steel blade he had forged, because storms pass, but wrath does not sleep. Outside, Stillwater breathed under the rain's lullaby, unaware that mercy sometimes invites vengeance to dance in the dark. The rain eased by dawn, leaving Stillwater wrapped in mist that smelled of clay and clean beginnings. Women hung blankets over railings to dry. Children laughed at puddles where yesterday they had feared drowning. Hope, it seemed, floated on the new river that curved past town. But hope is restless. In the sheriff's office, the stranger and Sheriff Duncan inventoried Reuben's ledgers by lantern glow. Pages glued themselves together with damp, yet the ink remained legible. Payments, punishments, a theology of terror rendered in tidy columns. Miriam watched from the doorway, face pale but determined. "Cellar ledgers still hidden," she reminded them. "Behind the coal bin." Duncan scratched his beard. "Rivers likely flooded the parsonage basement. We'll fetch it once the water drops." They did not know that while they spoke, Deacon Harp and two loyal farmhands rode through back alleys, coats turned inside out against the drizzle. At the jail, they offered the night deputy hot coffee laced with laudanum. When the poor man sagged, they slipped the iron key from his belt and opened Reuben's cell. The pastor emerged disheveled, eyes gleaming like a lantern trimmed too high. "Take me home," he hissed. "God's word is drowning, and we'll dredge it up." The stranger felt the betrayal as an ache before any alarm sounded. He stepped outside and saw hoofprints in fresh mud leading south. Miriam followed his gaze. Instinct told her whose tracks they were. They reached the parsonage just as Harp hauled soggy crates from the cellar. Reuben stood on the porch, clutching a black-bound book against his chest. Smoke curled from a copper washtub where hymn sheets already burned, pages shriveling like moth wings. "Stop!" Miriam cried. Reuben's smile split his face. "Too late, my dove. Sin cannot stand the fire." The stranger vaulted the picket fence. Harp swung a shovel, but years of hammering iron had given the stranger faster hands. He caught the haft, twisted, and sent Harp sprawling into mud. Reuben dashed inside, book in hand. Miriam and the stranger burst through the doorway after him. The hallway reeked of mold and lamp oil. Puddles tracked across the floorboards. In the kitchen, Reuben tipped an oil lamp, flames whooshing across spilled kerosene toward stacked ledgers. Miriam flinched, memories of burn scars twitching under her sleeves. The stranger yanked his long coat free and slapped at the spreading fire. Oil splashed his arms, heat biting, but the flames died before reaching the pile of books. Reuben fled toward the cellar door. Miriam, faster than fear, slammed it shut and braced her shoulder against it. Wood trembled under the pastor's fists. "Obey your husband," he roared. "Obey God," she answered, voice breaking yet firm. Sheriff Duncan and townsfolk arrived, dragging a dazed harp behind them. Duncan kicked the cellar door wide. Reuben staggered up into iron bracelets. Smoke drifted through the mist-soft morning as if heaven itself sighed. Miriam knelt beside the rescued ledgers, their pages swollen but unburnt. She pressed her palm to the stranger's singed forearm. "You saved more than paper," she whispered. He met her eyes, finding in their depth something beyond gratitude, something with wings, still fragile but beating. Outside, the church bell rang on its own again, wind swaying the tower. This time its voice sounded less like judgment and more like waking from a long, bad dream. Reuben's trial was set for 2 days hence, a speed unheard of in Stillwater, but thunder had a way of spurring even sleepy judges. Word spread that a circuit magistrate would ride in. Townsfolk polished shoes and arguments, each ready to swear they had always suspected something was wrong. The stranger kept away from the courthouse bustle. Instead, he sat on the bluff above the newborn river, knife in hand, carving curls from a branch of mesquite. Behind him, Miriam approached, boots squelching in soft earth. She carried a tin cup of coffee and a bruised yellow shawl that once belonged to her mother. "You can't keep watch on me forever," she said, setting the cup beside him. "I can try until the gavel falls," he answered. "Then what?" "That depends on where the road points." For a while only the river spoke, rushing across stones that yesterday were dusty bones. Finally Miriam knelt. "You think justice ends hurt," she whispered. "It does not. It just changes the shape of it." She touched the scar that ran from his temple to jaw. "You know that. Tell me what shape you fear." "Loneliness. I never feared pain, only that no one would hear it." "I heard," he said, opening his hand so the wood shavings drifted away like pale feathers. Down in town the blacksmith rang his anvil. 3 sharp blows, their agreed signal. Evidence had arrived. They found Sheriff Duncan in the parsonage cellar, knee-deep in mud, dragging a chest through debris. Inside lay marriage records, alms receipts, and a bundle of letters. Reuben's correspondence with distant preachers who sold sermons on obedience. One envelope bore Miriam's maiden name, unopened, forwarded from a sister she had not seen since girlhood. Reuben had stamped it, "Return to sender." Tears welled. "He kept my family from me." "That ends today," Duncan said, handing her the letter. The stranger lifted a final ledger wrapped in oilcloth, donations pocketed instead of feeding orphans, enough to patch every roof in Stillwater. "This will bury him," the sheriff muttered. "Maybe," the stranger replied. "But burying one man won't raise Stillwater. Folks let him preach fists because it was easier than facing their own quiet cruelties." Evening fell lavender over wet roofs. Torchlight flickered outside the jail where townspeople gathered, some with pies, others with pitchfork handles hidden under shawls. The stranger stood beside Miriam, both watching the crowd debate whether mercy or wrath should rule dawn. She slipped her hand into his. If they choose wrath, then mercy will have to speak louder. Above them, the church bell, repaired that afternoon, gave a tentative single chime, neither judgment nor surrender, but a simple summons. Come see what tomorrow brings. Dawn arrived shy and grey, tucking mist into every alley of Stillwater, as though the night were reluctant to leave. Long before the first rooster cleared its throat, lanterns bobbed along Main Street, men and women converging on the cramped courthouse, boots sucking at the moist earth left by the storm. Inside, crude benches groaned beneath the weight of farmers in Sunday coats and mothers clutching infants swaddled against the chill. No one intended to miss the reckoning of Pastor Reuben Kingsley. He stood beneath the territorial flag between 2 deputies, iron cuffs dull against the black of his torn frock coat. The flame that once heated his sermons now guttered behind fever-bright eyes. Beyond the window panes, orphaned sparrows picked at puddles, their chirps the only contradiction to the hush. Circuit Judge Calder, hawk-nosed and unsmiling, struck the gavel once. "Territory versus Kingsley," he intoned. Sheriff Duncan produced ledgers like bricks of guilt, stacking them on the witness table until their leather spines leaned. Damp pages clung together, yet every figure bled through. Laudanum in triplicate, ether under false charities, tithes diverted into entries labelled special expenses. Each line was read aloud, each sum rippled through the gallery, the sound of outrage swelling like wind inside a canyon. Asked to answer, Reuben gathered what remained of his dignity and spun blame like straw, the devil's temptation, the stranger's meddling, Miriam's rebellion. His voice cracked on her name, whether from rage or fear even he could not tell. The murmurs that followed were not sympathy, but the low thunder of a crowd rewriting its memory of him. When Miriam took the stand, silence solidified. The bruise on her cheek had faded to pale gold, a sunrise after the longest night. It drew eyes more surely than any rouge. She recounted quietly, nights of forced prayer on raw knees, doses of nerve tonic fed through a spoon, clinking her teeth, letters from her sister intercepted and burned. Pain, she said, was never the worst. The worst was believing God preferred my silence. Her words carried no bitterness, only precise sorrow. Old men who had nodded through every fiery sermon wiped their spectacles. Young women clasped hands, seeing their own futures in her defiance. Through narrow panes, the stranger's silhouette leaned against a side wall, sentinel rather than spectator. Rain-washed light draped his shoulders, and every so often Miriam's gaze met his, the way a sailor checks a far lighthouse. The verdict came swift, guilty on charges of fraud, assault, and unlawful restraint. Judge Calder sentenced Reuben to 20 years hard labor in Yuma prison. All property was seized for restitution. A prison wagon waited, iron doors clanged as the disgraced preacher was hustled out. He offered no final scripture. The stranger wondered whether the man's God had followed him or stayed behind in the empty church, ashamed. Calder faced the gallery. Tyranny seldom blooms alone. It sprouts in soil watered by indifference. Let today remind Stillwater that a community must till its own garden. Benches became confessionals. No one met another's eyes. By afternoon, energy returned, as though a spell had lifted. At the river's edge, planks and rope appeared like magic. Funds once lining Reuben's pockets now formed a sturdy footbridge. Children carried nails in coffee tins. Widowers shared tobacco with bachelors they had once dismissed. Over a kettle of stew, Miriam directed the shifting army. Sleeves rolled, laughter tentative but real. She had not planned leadership, yet it settled over her shoulders as naturally as a rain-damp shawl. The stranger hauled timbers until blisters split, savoring honest ache. When the final board was set, he tied his horse at the smithy rail. Twilight poured copper over the valley, staining the newborn river a color like fortune. Miriam approached with a satchel and a letter freshly unfolded, the one Reuben had withheld. Tears shimmered but did not fall. "My sister invites me to New Mexico," she said. "Land near the Pecos. Water runs year-round." He brushed sawdust from his hair. "Sounds like ground that never forgets rain." "I'd like to see it," she ventured, eyes lifting. "But the road is long and widens at night." "You're not alone on roads anymore," he said. Yet he saddled his horse. She pressed a cloth pouch into his palm, coins, a silver locket and a ribbon the color of dawn. "For your journey," she insisted. The stranger studied the river, bridge, town. "I was a passerby who listened," he murmured. "Wherever I ride, I'll keep listening. If ever I crave still water, I'll know where to find it." He mounted, boots settling in stirrups. Miriam reached up and touched the scar on his cheek, a blessing rather than goodbye. He leaned forward and whispered something only she could hear. Whatever the words, they made her smile through tears. He rode west, horizon drinking the last of the day. Far behind, bell ropes creaked. children testing their new echo, not priests proclaiming doom. The peal rolled across sage and mesa until it blended with hoofbeats, a promise stretched thin over distance, yet unbroken. Stillwater listened, determined never again to feign deafness to a whisper. If this story moved you, if Miriam's quiet courage and the stranger's resolve stirred something deep, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Your comment might be the whisper that gives someone else the strength to speak. And while you're there, hit subscribe so you never miss the echoes of justice, hope, and redemption we explore together every week.